Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Floyd Fawkes, the entertainer, for having entertained us so ably and with such grace and class.
Thank you so much.
Big round of applause to Mr. Floyd Fawkes. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite the following persons to the head table. First, Mr. Vivian Crawford. Mr. Vivian Crawford will be the invocation. Professor, the Honorable Earl Morrison, President of the University of Technology. Professor Gossett Oliver, lifelong friend and Vice President of Graduate Studies, Research and Entrepreneurship, University of Technology. Mistress Shirley Graham Paul, who is from the past Public Relations Officer of our organization Sickle Cell Anemia Research in London. Dr. Neville Clare, the founder of the organization of Sickle Cell Anemia Research, the person who in fact is responsible for the staging of this occasion, launching of this book. Professor Graham Sargent, who is not only a sickle cell researcher, but one of the pioneers in sickle cell research in the world. He's stationed at the University of the West Indies. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I know that all of you may not be able to see me, but this occasion is a very special occasion because it seems as if not only the research and development of sickle cell disease has come full circle, but one of the persons who is responsible for part of that circle is none other than a Jamaican by birth, an Englishman by not only association, but by this, it must be culture. And he is none other than Dr. Neville Clare. And it is, in fact, this book, which is an important documentation of his condition, that has led to this occasion, the staging of this occasion this afternoon, this evening. Indeed, Professor Sargent, an Englishman, now Jamaican, has been one of the foremost research persons responsible for research in sickle cell, who is now a Jamaican resident. And Dr. Clare, a Jamaican, who is the victim of this disorder, this disease, is an Englishman and a resident in England. And so it seems as if the relative roles have been reversed. One, the therapist, researcher, and the other, the person suffering from this particular condition. But this occasion calls us, therefore, to see this disease, sickle cell disease, as a global disease, And although leadership has been given over many years from the University of the West Indies, it has come full circle to demonstrate in this book the impact of this condition. And in this period of globalization, it is fitting that a book launch of this kind should take place in Jamaica. Not only take place in Jamaica, but in the kind of surroundings, the ambience of an Eden Gardens. And so as we begin the formal aspect of this book launch, I'm going to invite none other than the Executive Director of the Institute of Jamaica, Mr. Vivian Crawford, to give the invocation.
Let us become still, as we know there is one power and one presence in the universe, God the good, the omnipotent. And so, gracious Father, in this consciousness, in union with you who made us, we ask you to remember planet Earth, those who lead, those who follow. We place this launch into your hands, and we thank you for medical science. We thank you for leaders in the field of sickle cell, for our author, Dr. Clare, for a nurse, Sister Shirley, a Kendall train crash survivor. We know that nothing but good can come from you, O God our Father, for you made us. And if we keep close to you, you will keep close to us. So we place everything into your hands for this launch. For yours is the kingdom, and yours is the power, and yours is the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crawford. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Professor Errol Morrison is no stranger to us, to those of you in the audience and those at the head table. He himself is a pioneer of international stature in the area of diabetes, research and development and treatment. Presently, the Honorable Professor Morrison occupies the position of President of the University of Technology of Jamaica. In taking this particular office, we have seen a high level of both qualitative and quantitative change taking place at the University of Technology. Incidentally, the University of Technology is the premier university of Jamaica. Indeed, Professor Morrison carries with him a track record of academic achievements at the highest level. We are proud to have him this evening to be with us and to give the opening remarks, as we know his erudition goes far and wide. Professor Morrison, we invite you to give the opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Professor Davidson. My friends and colleagues, it's a special evening. I want to recognize Professor Graham Sargent, the guru of this condition of sickle cell disease in Jamaica, in the Caribbean, and internationally. And I think there can never be too much praise that can be heaped upon him as an individual who has set his professional career in a condition which he has helped to evaluate and to assist a number of individuals throughout Jamaica in particular. And it is interesting that the author, as he strove to understand this condition more and more, his paths crossed with that of Professor Graham Sargent. So I want to just take time out to recognize Professor Graham Sargent for the work which he has done. He has retired from the University of the West Indies, but the condition and the work has not retired from him. And we understand and we see that he continues in that pursuit. And we can only wish him well as he continues to evaluate and to help those in our country who are so affected. Professor Graham Sargent, we're profoundly thankful to your years of total commitment. Neville, I have never met you, but I was given your book, and I had it on my table for several weeks before I attempted to get at it. Because when I saw the title, An Oscar for My Troubles, I wasn't too sure, but when I saw it really dealt with sickle, I said, oh, another one of those. And it took me several weeks before I really settled. And it was after several proddings of your good friend and mentor, Professor Gossett himself, and I sat down to read. And I must tell you, Neville, when I started, I couldn't put this book down. It is so well written, and I made every attempt to read this book as a non-physician. I just wanted to see what it is an individual affected by the condition would be telling us about his condition, literally. And it was spellbinding. But over and beyond the sickle, I must tell you, Neville, that you opened yet another path for me, because you share a certain affinity with Professor Gossett Oliver, where he was a facilitator for much of your development and maturation. In a similar way, I share an affiliation with Professor Gossett Oliver as he now attempts to mature and develop the work in graduate studies, research, and entrepreneurship at the University of the West Indies. Professor Gossett Oliver, as many of you may or may not know, is the first appointment of a professor from amongst the ranks within the University of Technology to be made in the history of that institution. Having read your book, Neville, I can now understand the man. I trust that both of you were teddy boys together. I don't know if you all know what teddy boys were, but in the 60s, 70s, these were fellows who dressed in a particular kind of way and had a special kind of hairstyle. High, shaved at the side, a mohawk Indian zing over the center, and were particularly unruly and caused much social unrest throughout Britain. It is my understanding that both Gothers and Neville shared that kind of early days. So I really was amused, the way in which you wrote the book. You were talking about a condition that caused so much suffering, so much problems, and yet you took time out to weave the influence that Gossett and your other friends were able to influence throughout your developing years. But I must tell you, I am going to be speaking not as a physician this evening, but just as an appreciator of an explanation of a life's work, of a determination, of the kind of experience which the philosopher speaks of when he says that many a successful man can be regarded as the boxer who was knocked down but never heard the referee count him out. He just got up and kept on going. And it is that kind of experience to which Neville writes, the travails, the oppositions, the obstacles, the lifelong hurdles that he has had to overcome as he tried to get this condition to be seen as an important one, not a minority one, but one that needed care and attention. And having read the book, and I said, no, Gossett tells me that he wants me to say a few words at the launch of this book. I asked a member of my department at UTech to read and tell me what she thought. Where's Joan? Joan? Joan Francis, where are you? I just want them to see Joan, who I don't think knows anything about sickle, and who would have had just a few days within which to read this, because I said I'm traveling to Britain and I'm coming back in a few days. I need you to help me put something together to say. Because I didn't want to sound like a physician this evening. I wanted to really speak to the book which is being launched this evening. And Joan, having read this book, put together just a few sentences which I thought I wanted to share with you, because clearly the empathy, the information which is shared in such a motivating, such a moving, such an experiential way must have come across to her, and she says, Professor, this book brings to mind the words of the philosopher Francis Bacon, who 400 years ago said, a wise man will make more opportunities than he finds. Francis Bacon, though 400 years earlier, must have been speaking to someone like Professor Neville Clare. Because Neville, himself afflicted by this condition, has worked tirelessly to remove the stigma associated with this medical condition. Because as you read this book and the story unfolds, the ignorance of the professional men and women who are handling him, both the medical as well as the nursing profession, who knew little, and when they learned a little, they would not share. And it's a condition, as you will learn, that the more you understand and can apply in your daily lifestyle, the better are the outcomes. So it is clear that Neville created in this book a new paradigm, a perspective of hope, as Joan puts it, which will undoubtedly have a profound effect on patient care, speaking from the health care delivery, and the community response to persons afflicted by the condition. And it is interesting that she picks up that community response, because Neville in this book speaks to the problems he had with his colleagues, those who supported and those who opposed and those who joined his movement with their different agendas, etc., and how he coped. But despite all of the fallout and the various activities that his movement developed, he nonetheless was steadfast. And Joan continues with the Bacon quote. As she said, Bacon himself wrote, "Some books are to be tasted, others to be swallowed, and some few to be chewed and digested. This book, she says, will be chewed and digested for a long time. And she continues, Bacon himself said, reading maketh a full man, a conference maketh a ready man, and writing an exact man. And it is that exactness which our author, Neville, shares with us, his personal and his professional experiences, which have contributed invaluably to the understanding in the island of Britain and the understanding more internationally of this condition amongst those who are so affected. And so finally, she points out in yet another Bacon quote, she said, this book must be read not to contradict and to confute, nor to believe and take for granted, but to weigh and consider. The travails to which Neville speaks, the developmental process in an understanding of a condition that clearly he has learned, having been buffeted by these adverse winds throughout his developing years, and to see him now accomplished academician, author, family man. As Professor Graham Sargent will tell you, there are not that many full-blown sickle cell individuals who can speak to that kind of accomplishment. And so I want to recognize Neville for clearly the rapid accumulation of knowledge that he has had to acquire. And you must recall, as you read, that when he couldn't find the support within the confines of the British Isles, he took a trip to the United States to try and find out what they knew there, because clearly a little more was learned as there was more of the indigenous population who had this kind of condition. And it was through that kind of exposure that he even learned of the work of one Graham Sargent, which was to become of world renown and a reference in the management of this condition. So Neville, we want to hail you. We want to thank you for this tome, which I'm sure will be a book of inspiration and a book of education and a book which will assist many, not only of those who are affected by the condition, but those who have friends, loved ones, and family members so afflicted, and who want to be able to understand more so they can help more. And so Joan finishes her little ditty by saying, ladies and gentlemen, the work herein outlined within this book is our challenge to go to spread the word, to educate, to enhance awareness. And in doing the activities which Neville clearly has had to do throughout his years upon this land, let us ponder upon these things and do likewise. Congratulations, Neville, and may your book find its way into many families and into many homes. And as we launch it here, may it be the beginning of a widespread distribution. And thank you so much for yet another contribution to humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, the Honorable Earl Morrison, for those opening remarks. And I'm sure this has set the stage for the remarks to be made by a personality whose name recurred with such frequency, because the book itself, as I read it, also did wove a tapestry. And part of the essence of that tapestry was the relationship between these two persons. Professor Gosseth Oliver, lifelong friend. I invite Professor Oliver to make a few remarks.
Mr. Master of Ceremonies, Dr. Winston Davison, distinguished members of the head table, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a pleasure and an honor to stand here this evening to say a few words, and the heading remarks, and I won't be as lengthy as our dear beloved Professor Morrison, but just to say that the essence of this evening is to sell the books. Yeah? And I want to make sure that at the end of this session, a number of you will sign up for purchasing of the books. I think Neville will do some autographing later on. But that's, for me, is one of the focal point of this evening. Indeed, this year, we celebrate, Neville and I, we celebrate 50 years of friendship. We met as young boys at first form at our secondary school in England in 1957. And that friendship continued up until today. And indeed, I want you all to recognize that this particular disease called sickle cell is really a chronic illness. And as children growing up in England in the days in the late 50s, very little was known about sickle cell. And Neville spent most of his time, believe it or not, in hospital, suffering with pain. And you will never believe he was going through this anguish of pain, physical pain. And those days, the West Indian family was ashamed to talk about this particular disease because little was known about it. Indeed, at one stage, I remember only too well, the word opium came into it. Science, yes. And perhaps for that reason, why our children in Jamaica shy away from science, because they think it's all to do with opium. But on a serious note, and so this was kept a secret. But when we went into first form, I just want to share this with you. We went into first form and we started in, I think it was in Form B. You know, kids just coming home, immigrant family, age 11. And we were both in Form 1B, and we worked hard. And the next year, Neville was promoted to 1A, to 2A, and I was still in 2B. Never lived it down. So, you know, I'm just saying the worth of the man. Suffering like this, but yet paralleled with that was his focus for academic studies. I remember one part in the book where this was a secondary modern school. And just to put it in some context, a secondary modern school in England is equivalent to an all-age school here. So you get an idea that you're really at the lower of the low. And so there's no homework or anything like that. And Neville went up, Neville's parents, who were sort of first generation immigrants in England, complained bitterly that, boy, you're not coming home with any homework, you go to school and you don't have no books. So Neville went to the teacher and said, can I beg you some homework because my parents are asking. So the teacher looked at him rather strangely and said, that's rather odd. Kids in this school don't ask for homework and you were asking for homework. Anyway, they made some arrangement and Neville started getting homework. I wasn't in that particular path. I took a different route. But those are the time, and I remember with so much fond memories. As I stand here this evening, I don't think that there are many sufferers with sickle cell who can, at age 60, who can stand here and have produced a book on that condition so we can all learn how to treat and manage this particular thing. And doesn't he look healthy? Give him a round of applause. And I want to just take time out as well, just to say the strength, the tower of strength, his dear wife, who's sitting beside him, must have had. Because, you know, I will from time to time pass through the United Kingdom, and I will call, I says, hi Nev, and she said, oh, Nev's not here. I said, oh, he's in hospital. And by the time I'm ready to leave, he's either coming out or perhaps going back in. He's had many sort of operation on his hips and so on and what have you. And so to live with that and to have the strength of a woman behind Neville is really, really wonderful. And I want to close. I could go on because, you know, 50 years is a long time and we have an awful lot to talk about. But the essence of the thing, I must get back to it, is purchasing of the books. But I just want to share another little secret. We used to attend parties. And any lady friends that Neville might have liked and would like to date, I would have to give my consent. We're only a year apart, but you know, I was a big brother. And this particular day, after dating a number of ladies, that's Neville, that is. He called me one day and said, you know, Gost, I think I'm going to get married. I said, what? But I don't know who you're getting married to. He said, that's a secret. And I knew of that because Neville did this behind me. And Neville, that was a wonderful choice. Perhaps if I had anything to do with it, you most probably wouldn't have been married because I was keeping away all the girls for myself, actually. So, let me just, in a closing remarks, just to take time out to recognize those persons friends of Neville who have traveled from the UK, from Barbados, from the US. We have a dear friend in this audience who also grew up with us. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Oliver. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we invite to the platform, or to the microphone rather, none other than Mrs. Shirley Graham Paul. The book, An Oscar for My Troubles, is a reflection of the founder's mnemonic, Organization for Sickle Cell Anemia Research, and the past public relations officer of this organization, OSCAR, an Organization for Sickle Cell Anemia Research, is Mrs. Shirley Graham Paul, whom I invite to give a summary of the book.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I think I haven't got a lot to say. Professor Morrison and Professor Oliver has pinched all that I needed to say. Anyway, I will just say it is indeed a pleasure to be here from England, among others, to join you for the official launch of Dr. Neville Clare's book, An Oscar for My Troubles. Dr. Clare is a pioneer of the awareness of sickle cell disease disorder in the United Kingdom, being a sickle cell sufferer himself. Having read the book, I will attempt to give you a short summary of its contents, but suggest that you read this book as it makes compelling reading, as you've heard before. Although Dr. Clare has lived with this disorder all these years, he has enjoyed his life with fun, laughter, and a lot of jovial experiences with Professor Oliver and their friends. Their friendship has lasted, as Professor Oliver just said, 50 years, having attended the same school as children in England. Dr. Clare went to England at the age of 11 years to join with his mother, who had gone there to seek a better life for herself and her only child. Over these years, Dr. Clare has been suffering the pains and illnesses and was not diagnosed with sickle cell anemia until he was aged 17 years. He was diagnosed with many other symptoms to the extreme of having surgery for appendicitis, because the medics thought that this was the reason for the pains he was experiencing. Of course, in those days, one thinks of our ethnic background as being guinea pigs for the surgeons. Once the diagnosis was made, Dr. Clare decided to embark on getting as much information as is possible to get on with his life. This led him on his own research, but there was very little to be learned in the United Kingdom. He sought help from the United States of America, which was more advanced in the studies of sickle cell. His political determination, with financial assistance from his father, allowed him to purchase books from the United States to assist him in his research. Thankfully, with the love and care of both his parents, Dr. Clare survived in living this disorder, because in the early years, many patients died in the United Kingdom due to lack of understanding of sickle cell disorder. Dr. Clare's aim was to make the awareness of sickle cell disorder recognized throughout the United Kingdom. His campaign started by getting a committee of people who were interested in his work for sickle cell awareness. This started at his office in Wood Green in London, which was named the Organization for Sickle Cell Anemia Research, hence the logo Oscar you see on this thing, An Oscar for My Troubles. I was elected on the committee as a public relations officer at the head office. My traveling from Reading in Berkshire, about 40 miles to London for meetings, tell you of my support in helping Dr. Clare to achieve his aim. Many branches were started all over the United Kingdom, where there was a large ethnic community, to encourage public interest and curiosity of people who wanted to learn more about the sickle cell disorder. During our campaign, I saw a need for a branch in Reading, where I live, and Oscar was started in 1984 and is still ongoing. That was quite an experience for me. In doing my research, I had meetings with various general practitioners in the area who was interested. I was told that sickle cell anemia would not be a problem in England because that was what they were told in medical school, and it was just a small paragraph in their textbooks. In following Dr. Clare's determination, I encourage members of the public to be tested for their sickle cell status, regardless of their race, or colour. The result of that campaign, we had a blue-eyed blonde attending the clinic for counselling from the haematologist because she had her blood results and was a sickle cell trait. After the formation of Oscar in the early 80s, Dr. Clare had the support of Dr. Martin Haringey and Professor Stroud, who had worked in Africa in the 1970s and had seen patients with the disorder. He was then based at King's College Hospital as a pediatrician. We must also add that Professor Sargent was very supportive in the work that Oscar and Dr. Clare is doing. Having read Dr. Clare's book, I can tell you, you will find an Oscar for My Troubles quite difficult to put down, as you've heard before. Dr. Clare's illness has never stopped him from enjoying life, especially when you read of the pranks that he and Professor Oliver got up to as youngsters. I have personally learned of another side of Dr. Clare, which is quite amusing, because my opinion that he's a very shy and reserved person with a good sense of humor, but none of those pranks was known to me. Dr. Clare's book has taken years to complete, but his experience and journeys will encourage other sickle cell patients that life is precious and is for living. I must say also, Goss was his best man at Neville's wedding, and I was also one of the attendees to Marva and Neville's wedding, and that was quite something too. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Shirley Graham, Paul, for that book summary, which captured the essence of the content of the book. But you really have to read this book to fully understand not only his suffering with this condition, but also it is sort of put against the background of some of the historical factors and incidents that took place during Britain at that time. And it is indeed a gripping book. Once you purchase it and you begin, you will never put it down. As a matter of fact, my copy has been going the rounds before this launch. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the man of the moment, Dr. Neville Clare, the founder of this organization, OSCAR, Organization of Sickle Cell Anemia Research, an organization that he has founded, he has invested in, and now he has brought this organization, the awareness of this organization, to the Jamaican public. As a Jamaican, I'm very proud that he has taken this pioneering spirit of Jamaicans to the United Kingdom and has in fact translated the spirit into something of goodwill for the Jamaican community, indeed the Jamaican diaspora, indeed all persons in the world who have suffered from this condition. It is with great pride that I now invite the author of this book, the founder of the Organization of Sickle Cell Anemia Research, an organization based in London, but now of global fame and importance. And so Dr. Neville Clare, as he comes to the microphone, I wish you to give him a big round of applause.
Thank you so much for the very kind words that have been said about me. The Master of Ceremonies, dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, and also my friends and family members, I would like to welcome you all, and those people who have never met, welcome as well. What I wanted to do when I thought of writing the book was to give a picture to people living in England and abroad who had not experienced living in the 1950s and 60s, the adversity that were there in terms of racism, in terms of ignorance, in terms of the problem that a child had to face, especially one with a debilitating condition like sickle cell. It was very, very difficult because the living condition in the 50s was really atrocious. Most homes for immigrant families had paraffin heaters, and many families have to live in single rooms only and had to bring their children up. And it was very difficult to even, when one thinks about not only living but surviving in a country that was very cold, one coming from a Caribbean, very warm climate and going to England. And the fact that I had lots of pain, it was very difficult at times. But I've always been a very positive person. I always look at the bottle that is half full rather than half empty. I think I've always tried to be very positive. And what I try to portray is something to a lot of sickle cell patients who can emulate what I'm doing. If they just try to be positive about life, you have to play by the rules and you have to accept your condition. I've known a few patients who've actually gone into mental institutions simply because they could not accept their condition. And over the course of 30 years, I must have seen at least 200 people I know or know about who've actually died. And the sad thing is, most of them died very early. Some not even reached teenage age. Some in their 20s, some in their 30s, and some in their 40s. Somebody asked one of the hematologists a few years ago, what's the lifespan for a sickle cell patient? And she said, about 40. Well, when I first read about sickle cell in 1974, at that point, I felt that I should be dead about 5 years, because it was about 21 then. And, I said, well, how comes I'm not dead? But the thing about it is that one has to try to live one's life in a positive frame. And I always talk about this, a great slave called Frederick Douglass. He became a US Senator. Now, he said, it is better to be in prison and you know where you're going than to be free and you don't know, you're completely confused. And I've always looked at this as a very encouraging thing, very important. And it's very important for our community because many of us are free, but we're lost. So we need to get this instillment in ourselves that we can do something positive. We can better our situation. No matter how much adversity there are, we can indeed fulfill any ambition if we try, to do our best. Try to emulate other people that you think that have actually people that you could look upon as somebody who've achieved. You can do the same, and that's what I've always tried to do. Even though I've said to somebody earlier this afternoon who has interviewed me that I've been in hospital about 100 times, and he just couldn't believe that. 100 times. And it's something that, you just have to go in hospital and then bounce back. And at times it can be difficult, but it's important still to be positive, always. Because during the past 3 years, I've had 2 hip replacements on the left and right leg. And many people said, well, what do you feel? How do you feel about it? And I said, well, look, what about the man who has got no legs? At least I can walk, at least I can see, I can talk, I'm happy with that. And some people can't understand it, that you can be, I've never been out of pain in my life, every day, even though I'm in pain. But a lot of people would know. And indeed, when I'm in hospital, and when patients are in the hospital, and doctors will see them laughing, or they'll see them speaking on the telephone, they believe that the patient are not in pain, simply because they don't understand the psychology of pain. You can actually be in severe pain, and mentally you try not to even think about the pain. And that is basically what I've always done. So sometimes the giveaway is when people will see me rubbing on my leg or something like that briefly. But generally speaking, I've always tried to show some sort of outgoingness. I tried to be pleasant. I never always, these words I've never said, why me? I've never said it, and I would never say it. It's important that if you've got a condition, you learn to deal with it, and you still can achieve, you still can get on in life. And that's basically what I've done. So I would like to thank everybody for coming, and indeed those friends who have actually come from the United States, England, Mrs. Graham Paul, my friend here, have come across from England, Barbados, Mr. and Mrs. White, and we also had Derek Stewart, a long-time friend of mine from England, who came in from Boston, and indeed family member, Norman MacDonald and his wife, and friends of mine from the Mr. and Mrs. Daly, Mr. and Mrs. Foster, who I met in England. And Mr. and Mrs. Daly have been friends for many, many, many years. She's known me, they've known me from I was a child. And they've known some of the antics that Professor Oliver and myself have been up to as children and also as young men. So I would like to thank everybody and the nice words that have been said, and I would really love you to read the book. I tried to make it as interesting as possible, and there are some funny moments. One of them in particular, although I can't remember whether I did put it in the book, was when I was in a ward where 6 people had died around me, and I was literally on the limb, almost going. And fortunately for me, it didn't happen. I survived. And all because of the negligence of a nurse. So, it's something that you just have to put life in perspective and just get on with your life. And that's basically what I've always tried to do. So thank you all for coming, and I hope, when you read the book, you will get some satisfaction from it. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, what an example of human fortitude. Big round of applause. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the expert, Professor Graham Sargent, who is the premier sickle cell researcher, not only in Jamaica, but throughout the world. At this time, he is going to make a presentation to you on this disease. I'll now invite Professor Graham Sargent to make his presentation.
Thank you very much. You have me at a slight disadvantage because I seem to be the only person who hasn't actually read the book. I haven't even been offered a copy yet, although Neville assured me that I'm going to get a signed one at the end of the evening. It's the first book launch I've been where people are so coy, nobody has yet mentioned the price. I didn't quite know how to pitch the talk because I didn't know who was coming and what your backgrounds were going to be. So what I'm going to do is just talk a little bit about sickle cell disease, about some of the common myths and misconceptions of the disease. Most of you will know what a normal red cell looks like, and that's on the left, and they last about 4 months in normal people. And of course, on the right, you have a distorted cell, which is characteristic of many patients with SS disease. And you can see that they are destroyed 10 times faster than normal. So one of the problems is you're going to have anemia and you're going to have jaundice. Next slide. The name, of course, will come as no surprise. You still see sickles, you can still buy them in Pepin, made in Birmingham, interestingly enough. Next slide. There's also a lot of confusion between the disease and the trait, and this is very, very important. This is, a lot of the things I'm going to say, Neville has lived with and knows about and has done much to try and rectify. But still, there is confusion, even in the minds of some doctors. They say, well, you have full-blown sickle cell disease, and you only have the trait. And what they mean, of course, is that you also have sickle cell disease, but it's not SS disease. It's a different form of sickle cell disease. So it's very important never to use the trait in that situation. Remember, the trait is a totally harmless condition. It's not a disease. It doesn't need any treatment. It will never become a disease. The only importance of the trait is you can pass it on to your children. And if your partner also has the trait, then you could be at risk of having a child with sickle cell disease. Next. This, of course, is the common genetic pattern where somebody with the trait has children by somebody who is AA. That's absolutely normal. They don't have an abnormal gene. And you can see that from that relationship, some of the children will be like one parent, some will be like the other. None will have sickle cell disease. To have sickle cell disease, you have to inherit abnormalities from both parents. We all know the fathers who say, it's on my wife's side, of course, it's all her fault. Not a bit of it. You have to have abnormal genes from both mother and father. Next slide. All right, another common misconception is that this disease is confined to people of African origin. If you look at the worldwide distribution of the gene, you'll see there's a lot of it in equatorial Africa. And from there it moves to South America, the Caribbean, North America, and latterly Europe. So the disease seen in those areas is predominantly among people of African ancestry. But if you start to look around the Mediterranean, southern Italy, northern Greece, Turkey, the Middle East, the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, and central India, you will find huge numbers affected by the disease who have really little evidence of African ancestry. Next slide. This is just a glimpse. Top left is a family in the village of Ormelia in northern Greece. Remember, in Jamaica, 10% of the people have the sickle cell trait. In Ormelia, 18% have the trait, nearly twice as common as Jamaica. White-skinned, blue-eyed, both parents have the trait, both children SS disease. Below them is a family in Turkey, both parents with the traits, and the daughter with SS disease on the left. Above right is a family in the north of Israel, of Bedouin origin, and the lady sitting on the left has SS disease, and the lady in orange in the center is her sister, and she has a child with SS disease, and the lady on the right is her sister, and she has on both sides children with SS disease. And if you look at the bottom pictures, in the middle, a family from Butera in the mountains of Sicily, where 13% have the trait. And if you look at the right, you see a patient from Orissa in India. Now, don't say, all right, there's the odd patient in India. The Anthropological Survey of India have done huge surveys across central India, and they calculate that the average trait frequency is 15%. Once you realize that 300 million people live in that area, you could quickly calculate that there may actually be more cases in India than there are in Africa. So remember, our knowledge is evolving all the time. Well, this, of course, is the commonest situation for somebody where both parents have the sickle cell trait. Now, if both parents have the trait, there is in each pregnancy a 1 in 4 chance that the child inherits the abnormal gene from mother and father, and so has SS disease. There is also a 75% chance, even if both parents carry the trait, that their children will be healthy. If you had if you knew a horse was going to come in 75% of the time, you'd bet on that horse. So even if both parents have the trait, it's very important to remember the genetics. Next slide. Let's go quickly through some of the features of the disease. It does often retard physical and sexual development. The picture on the left are twins, both aged 12. The girl has SS disease, her brother is AA. On the right, 2 boys of exactly the same age, 18 years, born within a month of each other. And you can see how SS disease can retard physical development. Next slide. You can also get jaundice, of course, not as yellow as this. This is an extreme example. But jaundice is common amongst patients with SS disease. Next slide. Leg ulcers, a particular problem amongst Jamaican patients, much less common in the UK and in the US. Next slide. Dactylitis, the hand-foot syndrome, often the first manifestation of the disease, resulting from damage to the bone marrow. Next slide. And of course, the painful crisis is exactly the same problem of bone marrow damage. Next slide. Also, damage to the hip, which we've already heard about, and Neville has already mentioned this has been one of his own problems. Next slide. Let's now put this into perspective. Let's go to sub-Saharan Africa. And you see there a list of countries, and you see on the left-hand column the population estimated by the World Bank in 2002. You can see the birth rate, you can see the trait rates, and on the last column you can see the number of babies born each year with SS disease. Next slide. Yes? Those add up to 210,000. And if you put in other countries in West Africa and East and Central Africa, next slide, you're talking about 268,000 babies a year born with this disease. No country in the world has the resources to cope with a problem of that size. And as with other things in medicine, the only hope is to actually prevent the disease. Next slide. Can it work? Well, look at Bahrain. Bahrain is in the Arabian Gulf. 16% of the population have the trait. And over 10 years, by premarital screening, initially voluntary and now mandatory, they have halved the frequency of babies born with SS disease. A community with arranged marriages, and they get a report saying either this marriage is fine or that this marriage is not recommended. The families can still go ahead, but they now know that that particular relationship is at risk of having affected children. Next slide. So in fact, this has now become mandatory in Bahrain, and they've also done it in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, now you cannot get married without both prospective partners of a marriage being screened for the sickle cell gene and being counselled. And here this is in Jeddah, on the Red Sea coast, and you can see the first 3 chairs are empty, but the next 3 chairs are occupied by ladies suitably demurely dressed who are actually waiting to have their sickle tests before prospective marriage. All right. Now, that is a very formal society, traditions of arranged marriages. We don't often have arranged marriages in Jamaica. And the real question is, can we actually prevent the disease here? And the reason we think we might be able to is for the last 7 or 8 years, Carleen Mason of the Sickle Cell Trust has gone around giving illustrated PowerPoint lectures to the 5th and 6th forms of virtually all 160 secondary schools in Jamaica. She talks about the disease, she talks about the genetics, she talks about how many people carry the trait, and the kids get all fired up and they say, Miss, can you come back tomorrow and test us to see whether or not we carry this gene? And she's had to say, no, we don't have the infrastructure to do it. You'll have to go to a private lab. It'll cost you $1,200, $1,500, and we lose the momentum. But from the beginning of next year, we will start the Manchester project. Most of you will know where Manchester is, central Jamaica. Next slide. And we're going to offer free screening to 4,000 5th and 6th form children attending 16 secondary schools in the parish of Manchester. Next slide. Those are the distributions of the schools, obviously centred in the Christiana and the Mandeville area, scattered. Next slide. Shows this is Cross Keys, voted the most elegant school uniform by the Sickle Cell Trust. And next slide, slightly more formal, Bishop Gibson High School for Girls, where Annette Piper, the headmistress, also took part in the photograph. She's on the left. Next slide. So we're going to actually offer free screening, and we're going to give them cards so that they know whether or not they carry the gene, and then we're going to go back in and we're going to do targeted counselling to say, right, you people all carry a gene that can give rise to sickle cell disease. A baby with sickle cell disease. The choice is yours. If you choose a partner who also carries an abnormal gene, you run that risk. If you choose a partner who's absolutely normal, you cannot have a child with sickle cell disease. So basically, we are seeking to empower the population to make an informed choice. Now we have to work out whether, of course, it works. And that means that we have to actually set up newborn screening. And we're going to screen the babies born at, as you can see, predominantly the 3 hospitals, but 6,000 deliveries a year in Manchester. So over 5 years, we're going to screen the school kids every year, and we're going to see if we can actually reduce the frequency of the disease. What's the economics of this? Well, the cost of the screening program is under $6 million a year. The lifetime medical costs for a patient with SS disease in Jamaica exceeds 1 million Jamaican dollars. Simple mathematics. If we can prevent 6 babies with sickle cell disease, we start to save money. Next slide. So this is it. Sensitize the school population, PowerPoint lectures, we obviously inform all the parents through opt-out letters, provide carrier detection for the sickle cell gene, the hemoglobin C gene, the beta thalassemia gene. We then have targeted education of the carriers, and then we sit back and see what impact we have on the reproductive decisions. So what happens if the program doesn't work? Well, if it doesn't work, it means Mandeville Hospital, which is now a superb hospital serving the whole of central Jamaica, a hospital recently extensively refurbished, but a hospital that can't diagnose sickle cell disease. They don't actually have hemoglobin electrophoresis available in Mandeville Hospital. 15% of Jamaicans carry abnormal genes and they can't be detected in the flagship of the Southern Healthcare region. So we're going to set it up in Mandeville for use by the hospital. We're also going to set up newborn screening. Of course, newborn screening is the gold standard for care for sickle cell disease. As you've already heard, there is a chance of dying with this disease. The greatest chance of dying is in the first year of life. Many of the causes of death can be prevented, but only if you know the child has the disease. So you have to have newborn screening. And of course, this has now become universal in the United States. It has in the last 3 years become universal in the UK. Its programs are beginning in Africa. So this is the gold standard. You know, Jamaica was actually the first country in the world to have extensive newborn screening. Starting on the 25th of June 1973, we screened 100,000 consecutive deliveries at Victoria Jubilee Hospital. The rest of the world said, you can't diagnose sickle cell disease at birth. But we could, and we did. And the finger over there operating the computer is the one who actually got the techniques going. So you can do things. And we're going to do it in Mandeville. So if it doesn't work, Mandeville Hospital will be able to diagnose the disease. They'll be able to diagnose newborns with the disease. And we'll have a population that is educated and sensitized to sickle cell disease. Next slide. What happens if it does work? Now we've got a model that can begin to significantly decrease the frequency of births with the disease. We will never eradicate the disease, but if we can reduce the prevalence and we can reduce the burden, then we can use the resources that we have to provide better care for the other patients who will not be prevented. So you've got a model that will be important for Jamaica, but now you've got a model which is much more appropriate to sub-Saharan Africa. They don't have arranged marriages either, mostly. But the social and cultural patterns of Jamaica are much more similar to many African countries, and our experience may well be directly relevant there. So we've heard about the book launch. You're going to find out the prize sooner or later. We've heard about the problems of the disease, and I think what will be suitable testimony to Neville is the feeling that maybe in the future we will be able to significantly reduce the frequency of this problem. And if it works, Manchester will become known worldwide. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, that applause is not sufficient for the brilliant presentation of Professor Sargent. Indeed, I think we have enjoyed this occasion, or the part of the formalities which this book signing carries with it. I'd like to thank all those who have so kindly assisted on this occasion, but I see here on the program that the vote of thanks could be able to be given by Mrs. Shirley Graham Paul. And now I would like to invite Mrs. Graham Paul to give the vote of thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we come to the close Thank you. As we come to the close of this part of the event, I would like to give some special thanks to Professor Winston Davidson, Public Officer of Health and Technology at the University of Technology in Jamaica, who is a very good friend of Neville Clare. The President of the University of Technology in Jamaica, Professor Eric Morrison, for setting the tone of tonight's event through his opening remarks. We would like to say a special thank you to Professor Gus Oliver and his secretary, Mrs. Nicole Edwards Bailey. Everyone should have a secretary like her. She really has worked hard to get this event together, and I have had some time working with her. You will be reading about Professor Oliver in the book, as I've said before. Thank you to Mr. Vivian Crawford, the Executive Director of the Institute of Jamaica, for the invocation of the beginning of the evening. Thank you to Professor Sargent on his very interesting presentation, and Mrs. Sargent, and I'm sure that you will take away some food for thought from what this presentation has given us. Last but not least, thank you for the proprietors of Eden Garden for allowing us to hold this event this evening for Dr. Clare's book. There are a lot of folks, as Neville had said before, that is attending from overseas. That doesn't mean that you're all not special, because folks travel from various areas in Jamaica, and I know I've traveled enough and it's far. So thank you for being here as well. And I think that's about all I need to say. Thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of the evening. But don't forget, this book is £9.99. Please buy the book. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, it now gives me great pleasure to invite Mistress Sargent, Mistress Graham Sargent, who is here with me on the platform, and I'm going to invite Mistress Clare, Mistress Neville Clare. Mrs. Sargent, who is the Jamaican British, or the British Jamaican, to present the token of our appreciation to the support that you have given your husband. Mrs. Sargent is going to present to a Jamaican British, or British Jamaican, a token of our appreciation of the support you have given to your husband, who has suffered for many years from this condition. Bouquet. And so, ladies and gentlemen, as we are entertained yet again by that excellent entertainer, Mr. Floyd Fawkes, we invite Dr. Clare to the signing ceremony. And those of you who wish to purchase a book, it's £9, how many pence? 99 pence. How much? What's that? Yes, I understand the exchange rate is 146. For those of you who are mathematicians, please make that calculation. And so, Dr. Clare, we will provide a chair for you for the signing.